The sterile click of Arthur Vance's gold-plated pen against his glass desk was the only sound he allowed himself to hear. It was easier than listening to the muffled sobs of his son down the hall. This wasn't just the sound of a failed therapy session. It was the sound of Arthur's profound, unspoken guilt, a guilt he walled off with spreadsheets and market projections. From his home office, a sterile glass box overlooking a rain-lashed Lincoln Park, Arthur watched the gray, late autumn afternoon bleed into evening. Rain streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows, mirroring the cold, immaculate order of his life. The mansion was a monument to his success, filled with expensive, abstract art, but it lacked the slightest hint of warmth. Down the hall, Dr. Jennings, a pediatric therapist commanding $400 an hour, quietly packed his leather briefcase. He approached Arthur's open door, offering a practiced, sympathetic shrug. "He's just resistant, Mr. Vance. His motivation is low today. We can try again next week." Arthur nodded curtly, his eyes never leaving the stock ticker on his monitor. "Invoice my assistant, doctor." He didn't ask how Leo was. He didn't walk the therapist to the door. He heard the heavy sigh and the soft footsteps retreating. Only then did Arthur allow his gaze to drift toward his son's room. Leo was slumped in his specialized therapeutic chair, a small, 5-year-old silhouette against the dying light. The boy's mild cerebral palsy affected the movement in his legs, but Arthur knew, with a gnawing certainty, that the limitation wasn't just physical. The boy was lonely, and it was Arthur's fault. Later, as Arthur was preparing for a late-night conference call with Tokyo, his wife, Eleanor, found him in the kitchen. She was followed by a woman Arthur hadn't seen before, dressed in the simple, clean uniform of the housekeeping agency. "Arthur, dear, this is Grace Harper. The agency sent her over. She's the new housemaid," Eleanor said, her voice strained with forced cheerfulness. Arthur barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through emails. He gave a single, dismissive nod. "Yes, fine. The agency sent your file." His eyes registered the dark skin, the plain uniform, and his prejudice, sharp and efficient, filed her away as unimportant. She was staff, part of the background. "My study is to be cleaned only on Mondays." "Understood." "Yes, sir," Grace replied. Her voice was quiet, steady. He walked away without a second glance, missing the way Grace's observant eyes drifted from him to the hallway leading to Leo's room. For the rest of the day, Grace performed her duties with a quiet efficiency. She dusted the cold sculptures and vacuumed the plush, silent carpets. But her primary focus was not on the house. It was on the small, withdrawn boy in the chair. She didn't see a condition or a medical case. She saw a little boy drowning in silence. While dusting in Leo's room, she watched him try to reach for a dropped plastic dinosaur. His small hand grasped, his legs twitched in frustration, and then, with a familiar sigh, he gave up. Grace knew that look. It wasn't the look of physical inability. It was the look of a spirit that had stopped trying. When she finished her shift, she quietly let herself out. That evening, Arthur sat in his office, the Tokyo call finished. He had a habit of reviewing the internal security feeds. He called it security, but it was really about control. He idly watched the day's footage, fast-forwarding through the hours. He stopped on the footage from Leo's room, watching Grace clean. He was about to skip ahead when he saw her pause by Leo's chair. He saw Leo drop the dinosaur. He watched Grace, thinking Arthur was gone for the day, kneel. He stops, rewinding the footage. Grace didn't just pick up the dropped toy. She spent 5 seconds gently repositioning Leo's foot on his footrest, a move he recognized from the expensive therapists. That small, professional gesture from Grace, it certainly caught Arthur's attention, and it makes you wonder just what she's hiding. If you are still watching and you're as intrigued by Grace's hidden skills as we are, let us know you're on this journey by commenting with the number 8 below. We love knowing you're with us. And if you believe these stories of hidden talents and unexpected kindness need to be told, please consider subscribing to Black Brilliance and ringing that notification bell. Your support helps us continue to create content that inspires and uplifts. Now, let's get back to the story. Arthur Vance came home 2 hours early on Tuesday, not out of desire, but because a merger had collapsed. As he entered the silent marble foyer, he heard something impossible coming from Leo's room. Laughter. He froze, his briefcase slipping from his grip. It wasn't the polite, strained encouragement of the paid therapists he'd overheard, or the defeated silence he had grown accustomed to. It was genuine, joyous, bubbling laughter from a 5-year-old child who hadn't truly laughed in months. His blood ran cold. Was she neglecting her duties? Just tickling him? Wasting time? Anger tightening his chest, Arthur stalked down the plush-carpeted hallway, his expensive shoes making no sound. He was ready to reprimand her, to remind her of her place. He eased the heavy oak door open just a crack, peering inside, ready to unleash his frustration. He froze. The scene before him made no sense. Grace was on the floor, her simple maid's uniform slightly rumpled, her sleeves pushed up. She was not playing. She was kneeling beside Leo, who was lying on his therapy mat. Her hands were on his small legs, guiding them with a gentle, practiced precision that Arthur recognized instantly. She was performing complex, professional physiotherapy exercises. "That's it, little warrior," Grace murmured, her voice soft but firm. "Pull that knee to your chest. Feel the stretch in your hamstring. Good. Now, let's work that posterior tibialis. Engage." Arthur's jaw went slack. Posterior tibialis? He was stunned. She was using highly specific, technical medical terms. This was not the vocabulary of a housemaid. Worse, Leo, his face screwed up in intense concentration, lifted his leg a few centimeters off the mat. A voluntary movement Arthur had been told by Dr. Jennings might never happen. As Leo's leg reached its peak, Grace clapped enthusiastically. "You did it. I knew you could." Leo beamed with a pride Arthur hadn't seen in years. At that precise moment, Eleanor appeared in the hallway behind him, holding a delicate teacup. She looked surprised to see Arthur home, but her expression softened as she, too, heard the joy from the room. "She has a special gift with him, Arthur," she whispered, a small, nervous smile on her face. "It's wonderful, isn't it?" Arthur turned on his wife, his eyes blazing with a confusing mix of fury and shock. "You knew about this?" he hissed, his voice trembling. "You knew she was doing this?" He didn't wait for an answer. He shoved the door open, the heavy wood slamming against the wall. The laughter stopped instantly. "What exactly?" Arthur's voice boomed, echoing in the suddenly silent room. "Do you think you are doing?" Leo's smile vanished. Grace stiffened, pulling her hands away from Leo as if his skin had turned to fire. But she didn't cower. She looked Arthur directly in the eye, her expression unreadable. The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the November frost outside as Arthur Vance cornered Grace against the stainless steel counter. He had dismissed his wife and sent Leo, protesting, to his room with a different nanny. Now it was just the billionaire and the housemaid. "Explain yourself," Arthur commanded. His mind was still replaying the technical terms Grace had used, words he only knew from expensive consultations. "Mr. Vance, I saw he was sad," Grace began, her hands twisting in the apron she still wore. "I didn't mean any harm." "Harm? You are performing medical procedures on my son. You are not trained for this. You are a housemaid." Arthur's voice was dangerously low, laced with the ice of his privilege. "You have no right to interfere with my son's medical treatment." His wounded pride, that this woman, this maid, had achieved in weeks what his millions had failed to do, fueled his anger. Grace's hands trembled slightly, but she met his gaze. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to overstep. My younger brother, Marcus, he was born with problems like Leo's. The doctors, they didn't have much hope." "So you read a few books?" Arthur scoffed. "I read every book," Grace said, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I watched videos. I took him to the free clinic and watched everything the therapists did. I became his therapist because we couldn't afford the ones you hire." She spoke of her brother, Marcus, and how he now walked, how he played basketball in their neighborhood. Arthur paused. He saw the raw passion in her eyes, the desperate sincerity. For a moment, he almost believed her, but his prejudice, ingrained in absolute, won out. A poor girl from the South Side reading library books didn't make her a doctor. It made her arrogant, dangerous. "Do not touch my son again," he said, the words final. Do your job. The job you were hired for. Are we clear? Grace looked down, her shoulders slumping. Yes, sir. But that night, Arthur couldn't sleep. Her story, and the undeniable image of Leo laughing, warred with his conviction. Consumed by suspicion, he made 2 calls. The first was to a security firm, ordering the installation of more sophisticated, hidden cameras in Leo's room and the main living areas. The second was to a private investigator. Grace Harper. Run a full background check. I want to know everything. 3 days later, the PI called back. Nothing criminal, Mr. Vance. She's clean. Standard stuff, until this. There's an address in South Side. She goes to 3 nights a week. It's not her apartment. It's an old, defunct community center. Arthur looks at the new security feed on his monitor. He watches Grace helping Leo, when she thinks no one is looking, with a simple stretch, and then he watches her write detailed notes, far too detailed, in a medical-style notebook. What are you hiding, Grace? He mutters, deciding he will follow her himself. Arthur is heading to the South Side, convinced he's uncovering a deception. He still thinks she's just a housemaid, but we know there's so much more to her story. If you are still watching, and you are waiting for Arthur to finally discover the truth, please comment with the number 8 below to let us know you're right here with us. This story is about recognizing brilliance where others only see prejudice. If you support that message, and you haven't subscribed yet, I truly encourage you to join the Black Brilliance family and ring that bell. Your support is what helps us continue to create great content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's follow him and see what he finds. Arthur Vance, billionaire, sat in his black Audi, parked across from a dilapidated community center in Chicago's South Side. He felt absurdly out of place, but the mystery of Grace Harper had become an obsession he couldn't shake. The private investigator's words echoed in his head. It's a defunct center. But Arthur had seen her go in. He'd followed her discreetly, watching her take 2 city buses, her posture straight and determined, until she reached this neighborhood he only ever read about in grim newspaper reports. He waited, his engine off, the cold of the November night seeping into the luxury car. What was she doing in there? He expected. He didn't know what. A second menial job? A prayer meeting? Finally, impatience gnawed through his suspicion. He got out, pulling the collar of his expensive wool coat tight. He crossed the cracked pavement, avoiding the dim yellow light of the street lamps, and peered through a grimy, wire mesh window. The sight left him speechless. His breath fogged the cold glass. This was no defunct center. The large, poorly lit room was filled with children. About 15 of them, some in small wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches, all gathered around Grace. She was at the center of the room, her coat off, sleeves rolled up, her face alive with a compassionate energy he had never seen. She had transformed this derelict space into a makeshift, volunteer rehab clinic. He watched, stunned, as she used the same creative, improvised tools the security cameras had captured. She was using colorful pillows as balance obstacles, thick clothing elastics for muscle strengthening, and even plastic bottles filled with sand as simple weights. This wasn't a game. It was professional therapy, adapted for zero budget. His eyes locked onto a small girl, no older than Leo, struggling to stand. "You've got this, Maria," Grace encouraged, her hand supporting the girl's hips. "Just like we practiced." He watched as Grace helped the girl take her first, shaky steps without her crutches. The sheer, unadulterated joy on the child's face, and the profound, quiet pride shining in Grace's eyes, created an unfamiliar lump in Arthur's throat. This wasn't arrogance. This was a calling. His gaze drifted to a folding table in the corner. He saw the mysterious bag he'd seen her carry from his house. It was open, filled with homemade therapy materials, donated toys, and a thick, university-level textbook on pediatric physical therapy. He couldn't reconcile the 2 images, the woman in the maid uniform and the dedicated, skilled professional before him. He stumbled back from the window, his mind reeling. He stepped out of the shadows and pushed open the creaking front door, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent room. "Grace." The moment Arthur spoke her name, the warmth in the community center vanished, replaced by the same cold, sterile tension from his kitchen. The children stared, frightened by the tall, severe-looking man in the expensive coat. Grace, moving with a calm authority, quickly instructed her volunteers and ensured the children were settled before she followed Arthur outside. The drive back to the Lincoln Park mansion was suffocatingly silent. Arthur didn't speak, his mind a maelstrom of confusion, shame, and the undeniable image of that little girl taking her first steps. He, the billionaire, was the one completely off balance, not her. He waited until they were standing in the vast, cold living room, the city lights twinkling like distant, indifferent stars. "Why?" Arthur finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me?" Grace stood near the cold fireplace, her coat still on. She looked exhausted, but the nervousness she'd shown in the kitchen was gone. She was resigned, tired of hiding. "You didn't ask, sir. You saw a housemaid." "Don't play games with me, Grace. That clinic, those children, that textbook. What is going on?" She took a deep breath, a sigh she seemed to have been holding for years. "Yes, sir. I have a degree. I graduated from the University of Illinois in physical therapy 3 years ago, with honors." The admission hit Arthur like a physical blow. A physical therapist, a licensed therapist, working as a housemaid? He couldn't compute the disparity. "Why?" Grace finally looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time, Arthur saw the full, crushing weight of the injustice she carried. "Because no one hires a black physical therapist from the South Side without clinical experience in high-end hospitals," she said, her voice heavy with the quiet sadness of dozens of rejections. "I sent resumes everywhere, sir. The answer was always no, or you're not the right fit. They saw my address, they saw me, and the interview was over before it began. I needed the job," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Any job. And then, I saw Leo. I saw he wasn't just struggling physically. He was sad. He had given up. I thought I could help. Discreetly. I never meant to disrespect you. I just wanted to help him." A profound, sickening wave of shame washed over Arthur. He was the system that rejected her. He was the man who judged on pedigree and appearance, the man who had looked at this brilliant, compassionate woman and seen nothing but a housemaid. As Arthur stood there, shattered by this revelation, a small voice called out from the hallway. "Grace? Daddy? Look." They both turned. Leo Vance was standing in the doorway, his face alight with a mixture of terror and triumph. He was walking unsteadily, his steps careful, but firmly, without his crutches for the first time in his life. He took one step, then another, his eyes locked on Grace. He walked straight to her and hugged her knees tightly. "I did it, Grace. I walked, just like you said." Arthur Vance looks at his son walking, then at the woman he called just a housemaid. He covers his face with his hands, and, for the first time since he was a child, he begins to sob. 3 months later, the smell of fresh paint and new drywall had replaced the scent of mildew at the Southside Community Center. Arthur Vance's apology that night, "You gave me back my son, and I treated you wrong," had been proven not by words, but by massive, decisive action. He had poured his resources into transforming the dilapidated building into a state-of-the-art clinic. Today was the grand opening of the Grace Marcus Institute of Child Therapy, named for Grace and the brother who first inspired her journey. The Vance mansion had transformed as well. The sterile silence was gone, replaced by the sound of Leo's confident footsteps on the marble floors. Arthur, a changed man, now left his office at 5 p.m. every day to play catch on the lawn with his son. He had learned the hard way what his wealth was truly for. Eleanor, no longer a nervous bystander, had become close friends with Grace, and now served as the Institute's head of community outreach, volunteering her time. Grace, wearing a professional blazer and looking every bit the director she now was, had been officially promoted to Leo's private therapist with a salary 5 times what she had earned as a housemaid. At the opening ceremony, Arthur stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of community members, reporters, and grateful parents. "I am a man who spent his life judging value by balance sheets," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I once judged a person by their uniform. I saw a housemaid, and I was blind. Grace Harper taught me that the true value of a person is not in their status, but in their capacity to heal others through unconditional love. Grace, accepting the thunderous applause, looks at Arthur, Leo, and the new children at the center, knowing that the miracle happened not because of money, but because someone finally saw the truth. The story of Arthur and Grace is a powerful reminder that the greatest miracles are often hidden behind the judgments we hold. True value is not measured by a uniform or a bank account, but by the quiet courage to act with kindness when no one is watching. When we dare to look past the surface, we not only discover the brilliance in others, we find the best part of ourselves. What did this story make you feel? We invite you to share your thoughts on kindness in the comments below. If these are the kinds of stories that warm your heart, please consider subscribing to Black Brilliance to celebrate more hidden heroes together.